Get ready for an eye-opening journey into the world of the 10 hidden realities of narcissistic abuse survivors. Discover the untold stories of those who've battled narcissistic abuse, their struggles, and their incredible resilience. 1. Narcissistic Abuse Survivors Experience. Emotional roller coaster. Survivors of narcissistic abuse often go through a roller coaster of emotions. This emotional unpredictability can be challenging for them to handle. Psychologists and experts say that this emotional roller coaster is a typical response to the trauma caused by narcissistic abuse. Dr. Ramani Durvasula, a clinical psychologist, explains, narcissistic abuse survivors often struggle with intense emotional turmoil because of the manipulation and mind games they've endured. It's like they've been on an emotional treadmill, constantly changing speed. So it's not unusual for survivors to have these ups and downs in their feelings as they try to heal and make sense of their experiences. 2. Narcissistic abuse survivors establish coping mechanisms. Narcissistic abuse survivors often develop coping mechanisms to deal with the emotional turmoil they've experienced. These coping mechanisms can range from unhealthy habits to more constructive strategies. For example, some survivors might turn to overeating or excessive drinking to numb the emotional pain caused by the abuse. On the other hand, psychiatrist Dr. Judith Orloff suggests that survivors can also develop healthier coping mechanisms. These may include therapy, self-care practices, and building a support network. While the initial coping mechanisms like overeating or drinking might provide short-term relief, it's crucial for survivors to eventually shift towards more constructive strategies to heal and regain control over their lives. 3. Narcissistic abuse survivors isolate themselves from people. Narcissistic abuse survivors often feel lonely. Psychologists say narcissists are masters at cutting them off from loved ones. They make it hard for survivors to ask for support, but it's not just that. Many survivors pull away from their friends and family. They might be ashamed about what they went through or scared of what others will think. As therapist Dr. Jessica Zucker explains, survivors isolate themselves as a coping mechanism to protect themselves from further hurt. This isolation can be seriously tough for survivors. Dr. Ramani Durvasula adds, it's a common response to narcissistic abuse. Survivors need to reconnect with their support networks to heal. So while it might seem like survivors choose to be alone, it's often a result of their abuse and a need for self-preservation. 4. Narcissistic abuse survivors carry guilt and blame. Narcissistic abuse. Survivors often feel unwanted guilt and self-blame. Narcissists are skilled at manipulating their victims. They make them believe they're at fault. Survivors might think, I must have done something wrong for this to happen. Narcissists employ a tactic called gaslighting. They mess with the survivor's perception of reality, causing self-doubt and guilt. Dr. Judith Herman, a renowned psychiatrist, mentions trauma can make survivors internalize guilt as a coping mechanism. It's their way of regaining control in an unpredictable and chaotic situation. So, when someone's been through narcissistic abuse, these feelings of guilt and blame are like a protective shield against the harsh reality. 5. Narcissistic abuse survivors battle with self-doubt. Narcissistic abuse can mess with a person's head. Dr. Ramani Durvasula says that survivors often end up battling self-doubt. They're constantly questioning everything about themselves. This self-doubt comes from the narcissist's never-ending criticism and manipulation. Dr. Judith Orloff, another expert in the field, notes that survivors must seek help and therapy to heal from this emotional turmoil. Self-doubt is one of the many hurdles survivors must overcome to regain self-confidence and self-worth. Hello viewers, did you know 80% of you haven't subscribed? If you find this video helpful, please subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Your support means a lot. Now let's continue. 6. Narcissistic abuse survivors strive hard in rebuilding self-esteem. Rebuilding self-esteem after narcissistic abuse is no easy feat. It's like trying to piece together a broken mirror. Psychologists often stress that survivors go through a process where they regain their self-worth and start loving themselves once more. It's a bit like a puzzle. They slowly find their missing pieces and rebuild their confidence. Psychologist Dr. Kristen Neff highlights the importance of self-compassion. She says, self-compassion is about treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding as you would a good friend. Survivors need to be gentle with themselves during this journey. It's like they're nurturing a fragile plant back to life. So, it's not just about striving hard, but also being patient and kind to oneself in rebuilding self-esteem. 7. Narcissistic abuse survivors struggles with trust issues. Trust issues are common in narcissistic abuse survivors. According to Dr. Ramani Durvasula, this struggle often stems from the emotional and psychological damage caused by narcissistic relationships. Survivors have been manipulated and deceived by narcissists. As a result, it shatters their ability to trust others. Dr. Durvasula notes that these individuals often become hypervigilant and cautious in new relationships to protect themselves from potential harm. Survivors should take their time to rebuild trust in themselves and others. It's essential to remember that rebuilding trust is possible, but it might take time and support. 8. Narcissistic abuse survivors may have PTSD. Dr. Judith Herman has highlighted how traumatic events like abuse can have a long-lasting impact on one's mental health. In this case, survivors might experience flashbacks. They suddenly relive painful moments from their past with the narcissist. It's like a distressing movie replaying in their minds, causing anxiety and intense emotions. Dr. Julie L. Hall, a psychologist specializing in narcissistic abuse recovery, also emphasizes that emotional manipulation and constant belittling from narcissists can result in psychological injury akin to PTSD. It's important to recognize and validate the experiences of these survivors. Acknowledging the possibility of PTSD can help them seek the support and therapy they need to heal and move forward with their lives. 9. Narcissistic abuse survivors fear of repeating the cycle. Understanding why narcissistic abuse survivors often fear repeating the cycle is essential. Psychologists suggest this fear stems from the deep emotional scars left by narcissistic abuse. Survivors might become hypervigilant. They may always watch out for red flags in potential partners. They're terrified of ending up in a similar toxic dynamic. Additionally, Dr. Les Carter, a therapist specializing in narcissism and poisonous relationships, notes that the emotional trauma inflicted by narcissists can erode survivors' self-esteem and judgment. It leaves them vulnerable to attracting abusive individuals. Survivors fear repeating the cycle because they don't want to relive the pain and destruction they've already endured. They yearn for healthier, happier relationships and actively work to break free from the cycle of abuse. 10. Narcissistic abuse survivors undergo a lengthy healing process. Narcissistic abuse survivors go through a lengthy healing journey. The emotional wounds caused by such abuse run deep, taking time to address and heal. As Dr. Ramani explains, recovery is like peeling back the layers of an onion, one step at a time. Psychiatrist Dr. Judith Orloff highlights, healing from narcissistic abuse is a marathon, not a sprint. This lengthy process often involves therapy and the support of a solid social network. Yet it's essential to remember that survivors become resilient and incredibly strong as they gradually rebuild their lives and regain their sense of self. We've learned that healing takes time and differs for everyone. Support from friends and professionals is vital. PTSD can linger long after the abuse ends. But through it all, narcissistic abuse survivors display remarkable resilience and strength. Understanding these untold sides is essential for offering them the compassion and support they need on their healing journey. Remember, recovery is a process, and these survivors are on the road to reclaiming their lives and happiness. If you find value in this video, please express your appreciation by liking it and becoming a subscriber to this channel. I also advise you to check out another remarkable video in this direction. It's a great opportunity to expand your knowledge.